Hi, I want to take a few minutes to talk with you about a very important concept from critical thinking at the core of English 100, and that concept is inferences. In our syllabus, under student performance objectives on page 4, you will find this language. And what this language tells us is that in English 100, we want you to be able to use and make sound inferences as you read, and then we want you to be able to communicate those inferences in discussions, research, and writing, which means your papers, your blog posts, your discussion forums, and any other ways that you're communicating. So inference is about both a strategy for reading and understanding, but also a strategy for making sure we communicate clearly in our own writing and speaking. So here's a working definition of inference. It's got three elements: the conclusion, the evidence, and the reasoning. And the reasoning is the tissue that connects the evidence to the conclusion. And when we talk about whether an inference is sound, we're looking for two things. One, relevant evidence, and two, logical reasoning. Let's see if we can walk through how that might look as we talk about some inferences about gig. Remember, when we read gig, we're focused in this class on trying to identify reasons for work that the various interviewed workers share with their readers. And sometimes those reasons are explicitly stated, but more often than not, we need to infer the reasons. We need to craft our own conclusions based on evidence and our reasoning. So let's look at an example. Let's say that someone wanted to make this inference about Jim Churchman, the Walmart employee's interview. And they said, Jim Churchman works to connect with other people. Well, for that to be credible, there'd have to be evidence out there in the interview, that suggests that. And I think there is. He talks about playing guitars with his fellow employees. He talks about how much he loves greeting people when they come in the door. He talks about how his fellow employees helped him when his wife was ill, and he talks about even dinners and get-togethers. So clearly there's a preponderance of evidence from this piece that supports this idea that he works with people. Now the reasoning here, he works to connect with people. The reasoning here seems pretty solid. There's several mentions of experiences that are about connecting, and he talks throughout about how much he enjoys people. So even though he never particularly uses this phrase, connect with people, I think it's a fair inference to make from the evidence in the text, and it's a reasonable logical move to connect the two. Let's take a look at an inference that isn't as sound. Let's say someone wanted to argue that William Rosario, the UPS truck driver, works to help people. What would the evidence be? Well, there is one point in the text near the end where he talks about the job isn't all bad. Sometimes you get to do cool things like delivering Christmas presents to kids or helping someone succeed and grow their business. And at the moment, it's clear that Rosario sometimes helps people and that he likes it when he does that. But here, the problem becomes an issue of reasoning. Yes, there is some evidence in the text that that's what motivates Rosario. But the overwhelming preponderance of evidence is that Rosario steals from people, that Rosario breaks open into packages, that Rosario swims in people's pools, he eats their food, that he cheats his employers and others in various ways, that he mistreats people who are assigned to him. You can't really make a convincing claim that looking at the body of the interview, looking at all of what he says, that Rosario works to help people. So the logical reasoning in the first example of Churchman works. There's strong evidence, and the evidence, the preponderance of it, supports the claim. But in Rosario, it seems like a misread of the evidence. Yes, there's some evidence that he'd like to be this and that he sometimes does that, but overall it would be really a stretch to say that this is why he works. It might be why he wants to work, but it's not how he's actually behaving. Let's talk about inferences in our own writing, because what we want to do is support our claims with both of the elements of a good inference, evidence and reasoning. So we want to make sure that when we have a claim, here's an example, I work for spiritual fulfillment, and we have a piece of evidence, I regularly give free meals to a homeless customer at our restaurant, that the reasoning that connects that claim to that piece of evidence needs to be explained. Because it's not a given that spiritual fulfillment and helping the homeless are the same thing. We need something to connect those two ideas, to make the relationship between them clear so the reader actually doesn't have to make an inference and possibly make a wrong inference, or possibly start arguing with us over something that's not where we want to go. So we need to bring in our reasoning. And the key point here for this person would need to be something like, for me, helping others is part of my spiritual religious value system. So maybe someone's emphasizing Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, or maybe they're emphasizing a religious faith or spiritual notion of community or human connection. There could be a lot of different ways to reason this out. But the key here is that as a writer, you have to say, wait a second, it's not obvious what the connection between spiritual fulfillment and helping a homeless customer is. I need to connect that evidence to that claim with some reasoning. So hopefully this helps you think about the way we want to think about inferences when we read in Gig and when we write our papers, which are two things that we're going to be focused on this week in the class. So I hope that you all go forth and infer soundly.